What? No, same line. There's Moichat in the last Masechta in the volume. And we are on page 9, Ham and Aleph. In the third line. The first few lines are continuation from last night, but then it starts new stuff. You see my cotton? Yeah. Very good. The third line. Varmin. Second word from the end line. Varmin b'shem Shmuel. They say the name Shmuel. Pricha v'shchin hamorad ika b'neo. Now, this is talking about saras, about leprosy. We were talking about last night. It's actually not leprosy, whatever disease it is. Something else, like something like leprosy. So there was a machlokas, which we're going to survey again in a moment. Shin Rabbi Akiva and Rabbana. And the machlokas concerns what happens when you have one nega, one affliction which came, then went away, then it expanded into another affliction adjacent to it, and then the first one went away. So is the second one a continuation of the first one because originally it was an expansion, or is it a new one because although it was once an expansion, but the original one is no longer there, so it's no longer anchored in the first one, so it's a separate one. And this is a relevant point because if it's one continuous nega, then there's no way you can become purified in the middle. If it's not one continuous nega, then we can pursue a legal fiction, which is to say, well, you're purified for the first one because that one went away. Now the second one we don't have to look at it yet, we'll look at it some other time. In this specific case mentioned in our Gemara, after Yontif. In order that on Yontif itself you should be pure. So actually that's a legal loophole because actually you obviously do have a impure blemish, but that impure blemish we don't have to take into account because doesn't depurify you, doesn't defile you until you're actually viewed by a Kohen and pronounced to have become tummy.
What about pimple?
What? No, it's a specific type of white spot. It can't be a red, it's no pimple or, it has to be smooth in the skin, white, with white hair in it. Mm-hmm. So, it's very complicated actually. We don't have saras basically anymore. So it says, Marfa Armin B'Shem Shmuel, they say name Shmuel, Pircha B'Shchin HaMorad. The difference between the difference between Akiva and Rabbanan is manifest in the case where the tzaras took over the entire body. The lach is if a tzaras takes over your entire body, you turn white, you become an albino, then you're considered pure. So if you have a blotch, but not even it's completely white. And there's also a lach of Shchin HaMorad. Shchin HaMorad means that let's say you have the shiur of a shchin is the shiur of shchin, which is another term for zaras in this case, is the shiur the size of a small bean. So the thing is, let's say you have zaras around your finger, but the top of the finger is not the size of a bean. So even though if you take the entire area, would be tamei, but we only look at each surface separately. So despite the fact that you have a large blemish, since not one of the surfaces has the size of a small bean, so you are tar. Okay?
Would a wart be a blemish?
No, only white, the same thing. No. It has to be flush with the skin, not raised elevation. Wart is like a pimple in halacha. Yes, it's called. I think it's called. They identify most closely, although I don't know if it's exact, with Hansen's disease, which is not exactly leprosy. No, Hansen's disease is leprosy. So this is something else. I don't know exactly what this is. They don't know. What? Seems that it's extinct, but we don't know for sure. We just don't notice it anymore. So the name it says the Gemara. So Pircha Shchin HaMorad B'Neim. That's the difference between the Rabbi Akiva and Rabbanan. Pircha, where Pircha expanded, and Shchin HaMorad, and the case where it's around a surface which is not uniform. In other words, like the fingertip. Rabbi Akiva Omer, he cut mesa. Okay, so what happened was here, and the way the Gemara describe it, first, let's say you had, an interesting thing, let's say you had as part of your body was smooth, right? And then it became, it's hard to see what, they specifically talk about, let's say a person's nipple, so then on a person's chest. So let's say originally he was quite fat. So when he was quite fat, so then the nipple was flush with the rest of the flesh. And if he had saras on that area, so of course it makes him tummy. But then afterwards he lost some weight, so the nipple protruded more than the rest of the flesh around it. So then in that case, the shchin, although it's the same shiur, the same amount is there, but since now it's no longer a flush surface, so he loses his status of tummy, right? Because it's no longer flush. So it says, Rabbi Kiva Omer, in such a case, let's say first he had one spot, then the spot receded, right? And then the spot then you expanded, you became wide over your entire body, right? Not the spot receded, but rather the surface became irregular. And then you expand over your entire body. So Rabbi Kiva Omer, he cut mesa. It's all one long tzaras. Because even though it receded, it's still considered to be the same thing. Now, technically, at that point, he could have been tahor, right? Had he gone to a Kohen, but he didn't. Okay, so if he didn't go to a Kohen to say he's tahor, so actually now when it goes throughout his entire body and becomes completely white, he becomes tahor now, because we know that a poreach mina tameh becomes tahor. If you were tameh and then it spread all over the entire body, now you're considered tahor, right? Rabbanan say no, chorehu. Once, it's interesting, once it recedes in this fashion, so then it's considered to have become as if it's no longer there, according to Rabbanan. It's as if it dissipated. Even though it's still there, but halachically it's not there, so it's as if it dissipated. And then when it spread throughout your entire body, right, so porech mitoch hatu, that's porech mitoch hataro. It expanded out of something which was Torah, not out of something which is tummy. So therefore, since that's the case, you remain, somebody who's parech minatuma is tar, but somebody who's parech minatara is tummy. Okay? So, Rabbanan Michoriuk, it's another one, and therefore, parech minatar is tummy, it's, parech minatar, tar, and it's tummy. Begin that, so it says, begin the hu chori. Says, well, it's not exactly like I said, but rather because there's another, the Gemara is not saying this, I have to qualify. There's one other point that didn't make, which is important, which is that according to Rabbanan, even though the original one has now receded, both according to Rabbi Kiva and Rabbanan, even though the original one has now receded, but there's another one next to it, which is an expansion. So there actually are 4 stages. You had the original one, then one expanded next to it, then the original one lost its surface because he lost weight or something, and then it expanded throughout his entire body. Okay, that's a critical point. So Rabbanan hold that it's since the original one is no longer there, even though this is a one-point expansion, but since the original one is no longer there, not because it disappeared, but because it lost its surface area. So therefore then, at that point it became tar, and now when it expands through his entire body, it becomes tameh. But Rabbi Kiva said, even though the original one has receded in its surface area, but nevertheless, at some point, this new one was an expansion of the old one. Since it was an expansion of the old one, so therefore, in fact, the original nega, the original affliction was continuously present. And therefore, when it expanded throughout his entire body, then he becomes tar at that point, because since he was continuously tameh, that makes him tar. Okay? So it says the one again, Rabbanan Amri Chorehu Kiparech Min Atar Tami. Rabbanan say, let me go back a line. Let me start with the 4th line down. Rabbi Akiva says, Rabbi Akiva Me'akikan Mesa, this is the same one, continuous. So therefore, Kiparech Min Atame, it's when it expands throughout the entire body, it's expanding from Tame, and therefore he's tar. Rabbanan Me'echoriu, the new blemish is a different one, and therefore Biparech Minatar, it's expanding from the Torah, and therefore it's tummy. Begin to choret. That's because the one which is there now is a new one, because the first one receded in surface area. But if it were in who he, if it would have been the same one, so then Torah would have been Torah. V'asa kaidam Rabbi Shimon Lakish, and that's what Rabbi Shimon Lakish says. The spalin, there's machlokas parcha bo b'shchina morad. If you have something which expanded out of a nega which had originally lost its surface area, so then Rabbi Yochanan Rabbi Yochanan says it's Torah. Now, albeit it lost its original surface area, but nevertheless, technically, still the same nega. So therefore, since it's technically the same nega, so therefore, when it expands from that nega, it's Torah. Now, I don't know; it's not clear whether the Kohen actually came pronounced him Torah. In that case, I would find it difficult what Rabbi Yochanan is saying. I would say that it's a case where the surface area has receded, and it's evident that if a Kohen comes and pronounces it, he'll pronounce it Torah. But a Kohen has not yet gotten around to do that. Rabbi Yochanan says, so therefore, if it expands throughout his entire body, so therefore he becomes Torah at that point, even though it should be regarded as Torah mitoch haTomeh mitoch haTorah, because that it's expanded out of something which was not Tomei, but since the Kohen never formally declared a Torah, so therefore now it expands it, he can be considered Torah at this point. Shimon Lakish, he says, since the original one's surface area receded, so therefore it's no longer considered to exist, even if a Kohen is not yet pronounced as Bitor, and therefore when it expands throughout his body, he retains his character of Tumah, and becomes Tomei, because it's like a Poreach, min hator, since technically speaking his original nega was gone, so it's like a Poreach min hator, and now he becomes therefore Tomei. Again, the process is always reversed. Whatever you were before changes when you become the albino type. If you were before Torah, you become Tomei. Before Tomei, you become Torah. The Machlokas is where the surface area receded, but you have not yet been formally declared Torah. If you were considered at that point to be nevertheless a candidate for Torah, and therefore if you then get the blemish spread, you are considered to be Tomei? Or do I say no? As long as it didn't actually become declared to be Tar, you're still considered to be afflicted with that first affliction, and therefore it expands, you are become Tar out of your state of Tumah. Okay, if that was all very confusing, then now it will improve considerably. Okay? Rameir said it furthermore. Malakin Adam ad somos avi v'imo. A person is allowed to collect the bones of his father and mother on Chol Hamoed. Because it's a happy event for him to go and collect the bones of his relatives, scattered relatives on Chol Hamoed. An interesting Gemara. Rishono, originally they actually used to bury people. There's a sect in India which does something like this. Where they leave the corpses out for the birds to rip the flesh from the bones. I forget what sect that is. Buddhist? So all Buddhists? Not all Buddhists, is it?
You know what? I saw a crazy movie about the Dalai Lama. So
yeah.
One of these movies that showed somebody died and they brought the body out for the birds to eat.
Really? I bet you don't do it in America though. Yeah. So in any event, they're not so from here probably. So in any event, so.
And like I said, everything is told. There's a purpose for everything. But all fits in. That's why I went to that movie.
Yeah. I thought you were going to say it goes to show nobody's from in America. That's the flip side.
One of these recent two movies about the Dalai Lama recently. Last year.
I read somewhere that it is the religion closest to the world.
I don't believe it.
I don't believe that either.
I read that the book, the Jew and the Lotus.
No,
it's a kind of a nutty book.
Predates that in the art of motorcycle.
Anyway, so name it. So originally they used to do something like this. We show you coming, so they used to bury dead people mamuros. Mamuros are open holes, so their flesh would rot quicker. Nisara Abosar, when the flesh would rot, it's almost they would collect the bones, The Kovenos Barazim, and that day they would bury them in a secret place, meaning or underground, or according to Carbonata means in a cedar coffin, right, like wooden coffin. And also that day when they used to move the grave, move the bones, also Yom Misabo, that day they would be sad, the relative whose bones are moving, of the relative person whose bones are moving. The next day would make a simcha. Lomar, I guess is like the source for making like a kiddush on a yard site. Lomar sheni nochu avosa minadin, because he would feel happy that his parents or his relatives had respite now from their judgment. Meaning that part of the affliction visited on a human being after his death is that the body rots and is eaten by worms and all sorts of things. So that's part and parcel of the affliction which people suffer because of their sins. So therefore he's happy that that affliction no longer applies to his dead relative. It says that although human beings cannot feel with their nerves their bodies decomposing and being eaten, but there's a very deep sense of shame and degradation which is very, very powerfully afflicting to the dead soul. Okay? Is that what?
Is that consistent with all teachings?
With all teachings, so far as I know.
Well,
That's what it says here.
such as the burial rites and the notion of the pine coffin as a whole.
No, yeah, right. We want the body to decompose quicker. Right, because it atones. The quicker the better. That's why they used to leave it open out in the open to rot.
The Hebrew said, "Lishona, how you told them so." But who's they?
I don't know. How am I supposed to know where Rishona is?
But just the way it's phrased,
Yeah.
it seems implied as like a general rule that everybody does.
Right.
Well,
Obviously, that's what it implies.
that's how you
Yeah.
understand it.
Yeah.
It wasn't just a particular group; it was everybody.
No, it's everybody. Maybe time the first base on Mikdash. I don't know when it was, but that was general practice. Okay, say some more further.
Just in the Bible?
I don't think so. I don't remember in the Bavli. It's not cross-referenced here on the side. Tani, amavi orami makom l'makom. If somebody transports a coffin from place to place, ein bo mishum likud, that's almost it's not considered to be gathering of the bones. Vis-a-vis the halach of having to mourn on that day when they're moved. Rabbi Yochanan, that's Amar Baron Shalet. It's only if you're moving a coffin which is made out of stone, so the body did not decompose, or even the coffin did not decompose, and therefore you're not collecting anything. But Baron Shalet, if it's a wooden coffin, so therefore there was some decomposing either inside or outside the coffin, and that's why it's considered to be like gathering. Rabbi Yosef said, I shouldn't say decomposing, scattering. Scattering of the bones. Rabbi Yosef said, Afilu, the next word, Tamar, the Gillian Ephraim takes out, Afilu Baron Shalet, and Mishum Likrat Somos. Since it's all contained within the wooden coffin, it's not considered to be the collecting of bones. Ezu Likrat Somos, what is gathering bones? Because when you take all the bones and you put them into a sack, and you muck them from place to place. The Tani Kane, and we learned what's Likrat Somos, not just carrying and transporting, but rather malakit etzem, literally to gather up bones by bone, nishisachla basa, once the flesh is decomposed. Chagigah b'shem Rabbi Zira said likutei atzamos kishmua. Likutei atzamos is exactly what it sounds like to gather the bones. Tani, we learned, ain't shmua likutei atzamos. If you hear that bones were collected of your relative, but you weren't participating in the ceremony at the time yourself, so then you don't have to do Avelus. It says you have to do Avelus one day when the gathering of the bones takes place, but that's only for an actual participant. If you hear about it later on, so you don't have to do it. Suppose if one hears of a death in the family, one has to sit Shiva sometimes, if it's within 30 days or not. It's not true about this momentary ritual or brief ritual of Avelus when the bones of one's relatives are collected. Okay? Says Martani, that depends. Who should Shama Lamach for the next day? Shema Baba Yom, if on the very same day that they were gathered, you heard about it, Yesh Shmuel Likutei Atzamos, then you do have to sit briefly in Avelus on that day, which you heard that very day they had collected your relatives' bones. As Rabbi Yeshir Likud Atzomus, is there shiur how many bones are gathered, a measurement? Only Jews could ask a question like that. So says there was this guy in the internet. It wasn't that funny. And a guy a couple of years ago wrote what halachas of Christmas trees would look like if we actually, if it was up to us, we actually took the halachas of lulav and applied them to Christmas trees. So I think I told you that once my barber said, "You guys are so lucky that you guys don't have to spend $40 or $50 every year on a Christmas tree like we do." And I did not say that we spend more than that on a single branch. Forget about the tree. All right. I restrained myself. Says going further. So Tana the kumche kumer Rabbi Zera, the kumche say Rabbi Zera, and shiur likud atzavos. No, but it doesn't matter. As much as few bones as you gather, that's right. It's to be likud atzavos. A person is required to conduct himself with avelus for that one day. Right? Mona horei Rabbi Hillel the Kifra. Right? Mona paskin to Rabbi Hillel of Kifra likloa, to rend his garments, lisavel, and to mourn. Ki Rabbi Yacha, like Rabbi Yacha, that all the halachos avelus apply on that day when the bones are gathered. Shaloli Thomas, nevertheless, he was not allowed to go to the ceremony because Rabbi Hillel himself was a Kohen, so he had to stay away. Ki Rabbi Yossi, like Rabbi Yossi, it's not clear which Rabbi Yossi we're referring to. So it doesn't say anywhere that Rabbi Yossi forbade or over anybody else. But I guess it's just not mentioned in the Yerushalmi anywhere. Tani, we learned. When they gather bones, you don't say lamentations and give me a good word for nay. Mourning. Wailing we're going to have. Are we? Wailing. Let's go wailing. Okay, but says no lament. Yeah, they still will. That's right. Ululating, or something like that. Ululating. It's U-L something.
I was at a funeral.
They do it also at weddings, though.
Yeah, right.
It's a catch-all.
That's only a theoretical difference.
You mean there is no theoretical difference? Okay. Says it on further. There's a practical difference, not a theoretical. Says no. So when you the votes, you don't say lamentations and wailing. You also do not see the special bracha said in the presence of mourners, nor do you console the mourners. What is the blessing said to the Avelim? We're sure what they say when they make a wine. We don't do this so much anymore. We do a little bit like that, but when they come back from the grave, so they make a line between the consolers and the mourners walk through. But they used to say much more during that processional or recessional, whatever we're going to call it. Tani, we learned, only Malayan Borim, you say things about them. Mouth Borim, what's the things you say about them? But I make Kilusim, you say praises. In other words, you don't say lamentations in mourning, but you say praises, right? It's interesting, I saw in the, what paper had this? Maybe it was JWF News. Said that a bunch of these Jews went to the Ricky Birdsong's Levaya. And they noted, one of the conservative rabbis noted there's a difference between a Jewish Levaya and a non-Jewish Levaya. The Jewish Levayas are occasions to be sad, whereas this non-Jewish Levaya was a celebration. So we don't really have that concept. I guess it's from the Irish, the celebration concept. Yeah. So we don't have that concept, but except here it says the interesting thing that normally when a person dies you wail and you lament, but when this person, his bones are gathered, so then you say, praises about him, but you don't mourn and lament, which is a different type of ritual, obviously.
So the implication is that this is also said during the shiur of the regular days, isn't it?
No.
Because
No, it's a separate statement. Period. Tani Abu Omri goes back on what you do when you do Likud Atzamus, gather the bones.
The Catholics actually call the Mass in which the given a celebration there.
It's a celebration, man? Yeah. Okay, but they might not mean celebration the same way. They might mean like we say celebrate Tisha B'Av.
Nothing means celebration to basically ascend to heaven.
Okay. Yeah, we don't have that concept. Says so you can't arouse on a dead person on Chol Hamoed. Ezu Yura, what's arousing? Maskiroso ben Mason. So that's interesting. We're not talking about the eulogy. That's the next thing. That's to mention him among the dead, kind of like what we do today, the Kel Mole, right? In other words, but they used to do Kel Mole for a guy who died, and you can't do the Kel Mole on Chol Hamoed. I don't know if we do today. I don't remember being in Levaya Chol Hamoed recently, but I can tell you if they actually made the Kel Mole or not. But that's what it seems to be, not to mention them. Probably do make it made, because it says here, it sounds like it's a special prayer, not exactly our Kel Mole, that says Maskiroso Bein HaMesim, like to mention him among, the dead. So it sounds like it was some prayer on the plaques. They went down the list of plaques and read all the, so we don't have that kind of prayer anymore. Just collect your money. So it says the word, and you're not allowed to eulogize. Ezu Hesped, what's a eulogy? Shuosilo Hesped Pneatzmo. It's not mentioning him together with the other dead people, but giving him his own individual Hesped. Obviously, you must pay more for that. I was once I was in Yerushalmi, a friend, or a grandfather of a friend of mine died, and the father was at the time the rabbi of a community in West Hempstead, and he told us over that the Chevra Kaddish in Yerushalmi, the people are going to bury his father, so they asked him, what kind of levaya do you want? Do you want a levaya with crying or without crying? If you want it with crying, it's going to cost you more. Okay, so it costs more to have crying. So he took the one without crying. All right, so in any event, says the Gemara, that's our Rabbi Yosha. Now this is talking about a person who's been dead for a long time. Well, you know what? I think I made a mistake. I think it's not talking about Chomoy. I think it's still talking about the time you collect the bones. No, but I think let's go back to the Mishnah. 1 second. No, it is going back on the Moed Yontif, right? Okay, so it is going. So it says, I was right. It's going back on what you can do on Chomoy. Hadar Atom Rabbi Yosha. If it's an old death, you can't say Hesped and Chol Hamoed because it's going to make people re-arouse people to cry. But if it's a new death, you can make Hesped and Chol Hamoed. The reason being is that they're all worn out already from all the recent Hespedim, and it's not going to add any additional mourning on Chol Hamoed. Okay. Ezu Chodesh V'Yashu. What's a new Avelus where you can say Hesped because it's still as within the stages of the initial impact. Chadash is, and what's an old one? Ezu Chadash Tok Shloshim Yom. It's within 30 days of the death. You can make a Hesped on Chol Hamoed. Yashon, if it's an old means La'achar Shloshim. It's more than 30 days after the deth. So you can't make a Hesped because it brings new grief to the individual, which is not suffering at the moment. Tani, we learned Isha Lotar Isha Levayosa B'Moed. A woman should not arouse her mourning over her spouse on Chol Hamoed because that's particularly sorrowful. Now Shirmona said Omar Livyasa Leviasa is kind of like a play on words. Leviasa is a spouse, but it also comes, as the commentator points out, from the word for a mourn or cry, Yilolo. Kimad Tema, like it says, Hasidim Orei Leviasan, the ones who are eventually going to arouse lamentations. So Leviasan there means the lamentation. Tani, we learned, this is kind of out of left field. A person should never marry a woman who already has kids. I feel careful, even the kids are already dead. I'm Rav Yasa. Why? You name Maisa Shir because the Maisa which happened, the Bavli actually brings down the Maisa that a woman who had kids, they had died already, but had kids, she married a new spouse, and her husband set aside money to go up to Yerushalmi for Yontif, and she used the money to hire eulogizers to eulogize her dead son, and they didn't end up going to Yerushalmi for Yontif. So the moral of the story is never marry a woman who had kids. No, it's just advice. Okay? It's going to be bad. Okay, says the Mishnah further. One is not allowed to dig a burial, I think they're like in catacombs, like niches in the wall. Ukvaros and graves, moed and chomoed. But you can dedicate the catacombs, and the Gemara is going to say what that means. Vosin brechas, you can make a nivrechas. The Gemara is going to say what that means also. Vorani mameis b'chater, and you can make a coffin in the same courtyard where the dead body is, so he knows you're making for somebody who's dead. Rabbi Yosef forbids this unless you had planks ready from before you answer. What is considered to be consecrating or dedicating the graveyard? Rabbi Yosef ben Aroy Amar Soda B'Seed, it means to plaster with lime. So actually we're talking about, I guess, a burial cave. And they plaster with lime, but that was considered to be the finishing touches, which are permitted on Chol HaMoed. Chis says no, it's custom fitting. In other words, sometimes you have a long grave dug and you have to shorten it. So if it's long, you make it shorter. And so that's what you're allowed to do on Chol HaMoed. You can even do two sides. You can make long on one side and short on the other side. That's okay. You can also do that on the Chol HaMoed. Tanya Rabbi Chia said, you can make it longer or shorter. I skipped actually. You can make longer on one side and shorter on the other, but not longer on both sides. Tanya Rabbi Chia says, you can make it longer on both sides, shorter on both sides, whether one side or the other side. Both in the brechas moed, one can make a nivrechas. What's the nivrechas? Zabakia. That's called the bakia. Now bakia means this thing which Rabbi Chia is saying literally means to wedge in or to dig in. So it means to make the finishing touches to the burial area. You're allowed to do that on Chol HaMoed. Okay? Koshu toishav, anything which is made to set the dead body in. Toshav means lo shivenu, to set it in. Nikra Bakia, that's called Bakia. But says the word further, quoting the Mishnah, Varoni Lais V'Chalter, you're allowed to construct the coffin with the dead body in the courtyard. Hodah, that's our Marvin Meishin and Meforsa. That's only if the dead person is not famous. So therefore people are not going to know there's a death unless it's actually the same courtyard as the corpse. Avon Meishin Meforsa, but it's a famous dead person, everybody knows about the person either because he was famous when he was alive or his death is famous. So then Osin La'arna, Fila B'Shuk, you can even make the coffin in the marketplace because everybody knows that this coffin is going for this famous dead guy. Kadamach Rabbi Chanina Chayvin D'Rabbanan, when Rabbi Chanina, the friend of the rabbis, died, Avin Le'aron B'Shuk, they made him an aron in the marketplace along this lines of reasoning. By the way, I don't know if I told you this, but Rabbi Chanina was called Rabbi Chanina Chayvin D'Rabbanan, Rabbi Chanina, the friend of the rabbis, because he never got smicha. He never got Israeli smicha, which was the superior smicha. He only had the Babylonian smicha, which is our smicha nowadays. So therefore they called him what? Rabbi Chanina. So therefore they called him Rabbi Chanina Chavin D'Rabbanan, as opposed to Rabbi Chanina, which would have been his formal title had he actually achieved the Israeli smicha. Okay? Says the Gemara.
It's like a master's and then a PhD.
Not really. It's hard to describe. The one in Eretz Yisrael is far more extensive. It's not just a continuation of the same course of studies, but rather it's more expansive. It gave you more broad authority, much more judicial and legislative authority, which the Smicha in Eretz Yisrael doesn't give. Smicha in Eretz Yisrael just chutzarts indicates just a degree of proficiency in halacha. Not anymore. But in those days, it indicated a degree of proficiency in halacha, and Eretz Yisrael actually gave judicial and legislative rights.
A lot of power.
Yeah, a lot of power. Okay? Says more further. They said, they used to say, only half jokingly, that smicha in New York consisted of a piece of paper with Reb Moshe Feinstein's phone number on it. So that was the extent at which you knew about halacha when you finished. You knew enough to know that you didn't know enough.
I was told that YU's program was almost entirely Shulchan Aruch.
They lied to you. Why is Smicha Program was entirely non-Shulchan Aruch? You klep Shulchan Aruch usually in YU. You know what klep tests are? Klep tests are where you take tests in lieu of taking courses for college credits.
They don't want Shulchan Aruch.
Yeah. Honest. Okay?
That's a little right.
The big one, yeah, not the little one. Sure, they're klep tests. Not the kids who know the big one, the whole shebang. Okay, says more further. I just want to make sure I'm only casting spirits on my own smicha, not on his smicha. I'm sure his smicha is very good. Okay.
From this institution.
Yes. Says more further. Everybody agrees that you can't cut down cedar trees, chop them down fresh on Chol Hamoed to make the coffins. The Kabbalah similarly lacks of money. You can't cut out stones, quarry stones, in order to make the gravestone. If there are stones, and the question whether you want to put on the finishing touches on them, tiftu to the Rabbi Rabbanan. That's machlokas Rabbi Yehuda Rabbanan. The same thing we had in a Mishnah where if you can make a coffin out of wood, even if the planks are not in the courtyard, or the planks have to be in the courtyard. So to hear the question is whether you can put the finishing touches on the stones, or the finishing touches whether you have to be there. That's machlokas. Okay. Now, as you pointed out before, immediately from this, we go to marriage. You thought you were joking, right? No, you probably didn't think you were joking. One is not allowed to marry women on Chol Hamoed. Lo basulos, not for the first time around. Lo monos, not widows. Lo miyamin was not allowed to even do yibum, marry one's deceased brother's wife. Because it's a joy for him. But you can take back a woman you divorced on Chol Hamoed, because it's not such a big joy. A woman is allowed to do all of her toilette, or all the things she does in terms of putting on jewelry and cosmetics and all kind of stuff. Rabbi Yehuda Omer in the Bible says Chachomim moment, but here it says Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Isha lo so the woman should not apply lime facials on Yontif. Neshaniva law because it is painful for her. Okay. Yeah, lime facial removes the hair. It's a depilatory. I guess they knew how to mix it, so remove the hair, not the skin. They probably learned from experience. Okay? Says the Mishnah further. Top of 11. Shalva. Shimon bar Baba Shem Rabbi Yochanan. Shimon bar Rabbi Yochanan said, Nibnei bitul piriv rivin, not allowed to get married on Yontif because people are not going to engage in being fruitful and multiplying. Now that means is, if people are allowed to get married on Yontif, they're going to put off getting married until Yontif, because then they can kill two birds with one stone. Celebrate the Yontif and celebrate the wedding at the same time. So they're people not going to get married the rest of the year. We want people to get married throughout the year. Okay, imagine how wreak havoc with the wedding dates if every time they got married around Yom Tov. Bokum Rabbi Yasa, they asked for Rabbi Yasa, Eved, Maushi Samamoid, was slave, can he get married in Chol Hamoed? Now this is not talking about a full slave, because a full slave in Jewish law has no concept of marriage. Yeah, they don't have marriage. It's not considered to be a full slave, a non-Jewish slave, not considered to be susceptible to the institution of marriage. They just cohabitate. However, we're talking about a person who's half slave and half free. Okay, so one man, you had two masters, one of which released him, so therefore he's half slave and half free. So Amar Lon, so he said, Ishmini min adot, we're for him, somebody's half slave and half free, you could, although it's not brought down here, it says over there, you compel his master to release him, the one who still retains ownership. Because he's prevented from being fruitful and multiplying. So Hadamra teacher Evan, a half free, half slave, Mitzuva Piriv is required to be fruitful and multiply. And therefore, of course, Choshu Mitzuva, our Piriv, everybody's commanded to be fruitful and multiply. Also, Elisa B'moy is not to get married, Chol Hamoed. Right? Lest he get married, he put off the marriages to them. That's one reason. Rabbi Lezer, Rabbi Leah, Elon, Rabbi Lezer, B'Shem, Rabbi China said, "Our shame ain't shame. You can't get married because you're not allowed to mix together two different types of joy: the joy of Yontif and the joy of getting married." Okay? Yeah, honestly, yeah. That's why you don't celebrate two marriages simultaneously. You have twins; they can't get married the same night. Ein Marvin Simcha b'Simcha. Eat Simcha. Yeah. Yeah. Unless it's something which is, doesn't brook delay like a bris. But anything else, yeah, you put it off till after Yontif. Honest. Okay, you think about it. In the meantime, we'll go further. Says Rabbi Lo Shama Minadah. Rabbi Lo learned it from here.
Sorry, please. Go back to the part more. There is no proof about it. That everything is obligated in the next period of the ritual. All we have to prove is that the Chatzi Chorin part.
True, that's what it means. That the Chatzi Chorin is obligated. That's sufficient. You're right. The Chatzi Evet part is not necessarily required. Yeah. It means this person in this situation, because of his half-free part. Okay, so says Rabbi Lo Shama Lo Minadah. Rabbi Lo learned that from here. It says Ki Chanukah Samizbech also Shivas Yomim. Shlomo Melech, when he consecrated the Beis Hamikdash, she made that year they didn't fast Yom Kippur because they made the Simcha of the Beis Hamikdash for the 7 days preceding Yom Kippur, and then they made the Simcha of Sukkot for the 7 days after that. 7 days preceding Sukkot, and then the Simcha of Sukkot will be there after 7 days. It's a big shiloh. How come why did they have to fast on Yom Kippur? Did they do the right thing? Not do the right thing, but not for tonight. Says the Gemara, that's one reason. That reason brought down in the Bavli as well. Rabbi Yaakov Bar Achal Lo Sham Lo Minadah learned out for another reason. It says that Lavan told Yaakov after he tricked him and gave him lay and said, Rachel, Malay Shvua Zos, finish the week for this one, and then take the next one, take lay 10-day Rachel. So we see that there are two separate events, and they got me mixed. Each one has to finish shiur brachos before the other one begins. Bavli does not bring down this reason, this second reason here, because the Chazon Sofer says because we can't learn out from Lavan exactly. It was before the Torah was given, and Lavan wasn't a big tzaddik. So that's why the Bavli doesn't bring down this reason. But in fact, the Rambam, when he brings down Lavan, Marvin, Simcha, does bring down this reason from the Yerushalmi, from Lavan, as opposed to the reason from the Beis Hamikdash, because it's a much more direct pasuk. Says Gemara, Rabbi Avosh, Shemilah said he had another reason not to get married on Yontif, Mipnei HaTorach, because of the toil. Now that means that it ruins. It's the toil, not just of the chasna itself, but the toil also of the shiur brachos afterwards, and that's going to be important. Because Tani, we went to the Brayso, you can get married on the day before Yontif. Erev Yontif. Says more later, wait a minute, later Rabbi Lezer doesn't argue Rabbi Lezer. Rabbi Lezer says you're not allowed to get married on Yontif because of the toil involved, right? So the toil involved getting married is going to detract from your preparations for Yontif, to dealing with Yontif properly. So if that's the case, how are you allowed to get married on Erev Yontif? The toil for the Sheva brachas is going to detract from your dealing with Yontif properly, right? Also, Rabbi Yochanan said you're allowed to get married the rest of the year because now get married Yontif because then people won't get married the rest of the year. They'll wait always till Yontif in order to get married. Well, even if they have to get married on Erev Yontif, they're still going to wait till Yontif to get married because that way they can save money on the Sheva brachas because all the Sheva brachas will coincide with the festive meals of Yontif. But I feel Rabbi Chanina basically, and even Rabbi Chanina doesn't argue. So Chanina said the reason why you don't get married on Yontif is because you don't want to mix Simcha with Simcha. So even if you get married on Erev Yontif, still your whole Sheva brachas, all the 7 days of celebrating, coincide with the 7 days of Yontif. So you're mixing up the Simchas. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Ba said there's a idiom, there's a saying. Olas kalsa, the kala goes into the chuppah, nafkas tirchusa, and all the bother goes away. Is it true?
Absolutely, but that point is nothing you can do about it.
Right. So even though the Sheva brachas is coming up, but that pales by comparison. So therefore, as long as the chasna itself is done before Yontif, it doesn't matter if the Sheva brachas is going to take all of Yontif, and that's why you can have a chasna marriage Erev Yontif, even though Yontif itself you cannot. Okay? Says more further. You can take back your divorcee on Yontif, on Chol Hamoed. It's not so happy. It depends why you divorced her, right? But here it says, it's when you divorced her and when you were already fully married. But if you're only betrothed and not fully married, so when you take it back, it's a simcha, because you never really consummated your marriage, so that you're not allowed to do on Chol Hamoed, since it's a much bigger simcha. Okay? Says a woman can make her toilet on Moed, the Chol Hamoed. What is her toilet we're talking about? Kodeles, to comb her hair, kocheles, put on mascara, put keses, put on blush, v'notel sesara, remove her facial hair, vesti ponea, and cut her nails, u'maberes kli cheres al ponea, and passes a sharp, although blunted, piece of pottery on her face. What is that referring to? Rabbi Yehuda Abu Rabbi Messiah, Rabbi Yehuda, the father of Rabbi Messiah, said that is referring to the Lashon Naki Masisa. It's a clean language, but it's a euphemism for using a razor-type implement on the private parts of the body. Yes, it's not. It's made out of pottery, but it's made to ceramic. Right. That's right. Right. Okay. So the point is, it wasn't made out of like a metal razor. I guess for some sort of safety sake.
Male.
No, only female. So first of all, here it's the other parts of the body besides the face. It seems. No. Anything which has razor-like action is forbidden. Even ceramics. Okay, it says more. She can't have facials. I think they're facials. Maybe not on the rest of the body, this line. But it's the line treatment. It's two Amoraim. Rabbi Chanina Raimon had an argument. Chadamar once said, Besiege Shuma Tartu B'Soch HaMoed Nechlugu. The machlokas are allowed to use these treatments or not are even about the line which is going to come off during Chol Hamoed. I will see Shimatal Achmar, but she's leaving it until after the Yontif. To also forget it's for sure forbidden. But Choronam, the other said, the Shimatal Achmar Machlugu. No, the machlokas whether she can use the line which she leaves until after Yontif. I will see Shimatal B'Soch HaMoed, but the stuff you take off during Yontif, Divrei HaKol Mutter, that since you beautify you for the last days of Yontif, that's Mutter according to everybody. We don't know who said what. Rabbi Chanina, since Rabbi Chanina said that Rabbi Yasser Rabbi Yochanan says Rabbi Yehuda Kedaite, that Rabbi Yehuda is following his line of reasoning known from us from elsewhere. K'mar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Tzamon, just like Yehuda said elsewhere, Tzoras Shah Tzara, affliction for a short time is an affliction. So to he says Nibul Shah Nibul. Even to have that facial for a short amount of time, Chol HaMoed is prohibited because even temporary pain is prohibited on Chol HaMoed. Okay? Certainly you can't go to the dentist or the doctor on Chol HaMoed. It's going to cause you anguish of this sort. Okay? Having du'omer, so you must say, B'sitchu matartum toch HaMoed nechluku. That the machlokas is even about the stuff which is beautifying you on Chol HaMoed itself. But stuff which is you're just going to take off after Chol HaMoed, for sure, because for sure it is not for Chol HaMoed. Okay, you have a regular common guy, he can sew the normal fashion. But a tailor has to make a difference in the way he sews on Chol HaMoed. He's Mekalev. The Gemara is going to say what that is. When it's allowed, the way they used to make their beds in the old day, they used to have strips of leather which used to crisscross to hold up, the mattress. So they're allowed to do that on Chol HaMoed. Rabbi Yosef Rav is also even allowed to tighten them. The base Rabbi Yana Kedarko. What's the way a guy does if he's a commoner? That he's allowed even to fill a needle. Now this is the way to make fine seams before sewing machines, right? There was time before sewing machines, so he actually has to have tailors make seams. So what he used to stick a lot of material on the needle, in, out, in, out, in, out. Like make it like an accordion, and that way the seams were very fine. Okay, because there were many, many small stitches. So that a commoner guy is allowed to do, but a tailor can't do because that's expert craftsman work, and expert craftsman work is forbidden on Chol HaMoed. Okay? So,
I didn't know
it's a Gemara. It's Teicha. Mekalev achas achas. The Mekalev is when you do one by one, meaning you don't put multiple stitches on the needle at one time, but you stick it in, stick it out, stick it in, stick it out, and that's a more coarse seam. Rabbi Yochanan Kedarko is achas achas. No, to make the small seams is for sure also Kedarko. What a commoner is allowed to do, Kedarko is achas achas, one in, one out, one in, one out. Mekalev, that which it says like a dog stitch, which a craftsman's got to do, that's mafsia, where you make even broader stitches. And even broader he has to make even broader stitches, again, because he cannot engage in his craft on Chol HaMoed. Ma'asizim B'sai Rabbi Yochanan. There's a proof to Rabbi Yochanan from another Mishnah. It says, or Brisa, it says, Ha'leitz anim, these are belt makers, Mekalbin b'moed. They can do a mekalbin on moed. Well, in Tamar, if you're going to say mekalbin means achas achas, one stitch. So kachim nusa, that's not a difference. That's the way they normally work, because they can't make fine stitch work in leather belts, right? Or at least they couldn't. So it says, well, so it must be that what is mekalbin that a belt maker can do, mafsia, making extra large stitches, and that's what a craftsman is allowed to do. A craftsman is not allowed to even make normal stitches, much less nobody, even the commoner, is allowed to make the very fine stitches. Says the Gemara, what's a commoner, what's an expert tailor? Anybody who properly makes hems. Now here there's a few words missing. The shinun nuschos on the bottom of the Gemara brings them down. He says somebody who does the hems finely, zel uma, that's a craftsman. Anybody that doesn't do the hems finely, zui hedio, that's a commoner. Says Gemara on Rabbi Simon, betover kisin masnisa. That's not a good indication, because maybe we're not talking in our Mishnah about making garments, in which case they're hems. Maybe we're talking about sewing on pockets. So therefore, he needs some better way of identifying, but he does not provide us with it. The Machim was allowed to stretch a bread. Rabbi Yossi Amar Yispav Chizkiah Rabbi Yochanan Chizkiah Rabbi Yochanan Machlokes Chizkiah Amar Siru Geshtiva Erev. Siruk means to crisscross, like I said before. Mituach, to stretch, is Oshusi, O Arab, is either going warp or woof in either direction and tightening. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Siruk, Oshusi, O Arab. Siruk can mean either criss or cross, but not necessarily both. And Mituach means something else altogether. If it was loose, Mimatcha, you stretch it. Now, the Gemara goes on in this vein. Amr Bechia Barba, Hakomodim. Now, everybody can see the Siruk, that what's called Siruk, Siver, that's crisscrossing. Ma pleading, what's a machlokas, Bimisok, what's called tightening. Chizkar Oshasi O Erev. Chizkar says it means tightening in one or two directions, but not both. Rabbi Yochanan, no, it makes no difference in direction, means Imoy Sarafa, if it was loose, Mimatcha, you stretch it. Rabbi Yasser, Aril Shmuel, Rabbi Chanina, Rabbi Yipad told Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbi Chanina, that Siruk is Shtiva going crisscross. We don't know if that's because he holds like Chizka's definition, or V'inka does Rabbi Chir Baba, because he holds Chir Baba like Chir Baba, that nobody disagreed that is what Siruk means. I haven't made a price which proves to us, a Mishnah actually, that Siruk is Shasiva, that Siruk means crisscross. The Tinat Saman, I know you're all excited by this one, that's why I'm going a little bit faster. The Tinat Saman, we learned over there, HaChevel, the rope, when it's considered to be connected to the bed, when you crisscross three, literally houses. Now, three houses is a term used when you make patterns. If Siruk just meant going one direction or the other direction, you could warp or woof, you couldn't call it making a pattern, which is a house. So it must be that Siruk is Sibaer of crisscrossing, so that's how you have three houses, three sets of patterns. Okay? Again, the Gemara says that Isok Meimar Shasiv Lo Erev Lo Erev Lo Shti. Can you say it's in one direction, not the other? You're talking about houses? Obviously not. Now, Ma'ul Arin Tzarek, this is a cool question. A time-honored Jewish question. If I have a bed already made, can I say, I want another bed? And use a halachic ruse, a legal loophole, as if I intend to use a second bed, and the first bed is not sufficient, and make another bed on Chol HaMoed, even though it's not absolutely necessary. So it says, yes. Rabbi Yeshua says, no, sorry. It says, how could it be? Isla Kemach V'Tochen Chitin already has flour, and he goes out to grind more wheat? Makes no sense. So obviously he cannot do it a second. They can't do it. Nevertheless, we don't pass that way. As Mara says, Rabbi Zira Amar Rabbi Yonah, Rabbi Zira said to Rabbi Yonah, Pug Zamalach Shechur L'Duchna. Go buy us legumes for grinding. Amar Lezer said, Yislan Pilchel D'Mada, we have plenty of ground legumes for Yonah. We don't need more. The Ikpi D'Lavi, Rabbi Zira got upset at it. Why? Because really Harama, ruses are mutter. That's why we have a bunch of ruses in Judaism, which are permitted. It's only if one straightforwardly goes and does something forbidden that it's forbidden in many cases, but if one uses a ruse, particularly by the Rabbanans, very often it works. So here too, one is allowed, even though one has ample supply, to pretend that one doesn't want to use one's supply once one's fresh, and one can go out and take the fresh beans and grind them, not on Yontif necessarily, but on Chol HaMoed. Okay? So one's allowed to do the extra work. Okay, one can set up a oven, and a kirayim is another form of oven, on Chol HaMoed. One cannot braid millstones initially on Yontif. If they're not braiding well, they braid them. You can't do that on Chol HaMoed. I'm sorry. You can't do Chol HaMoed. You have to use for Yontif. It's too much work. Okay, says Gemara, Tana Rav Chaltav 13, Zayin. Tana Rav Chaltav Bar Shol said, Uvach leich the reno b'tchila. You're allowed to make you're allowed to fix a new oven, but you cannot, what's the word, make it. Fire it. You know, powder ovens are made out of clay, and they fire them in a kiln. That you can't do a Chol HaMoed. If you have one, you're getting it oven delivered from ABT, right? So you can have it delivered, right? You can have it delivered on Yontif, but you cannot make one, construct one on Chol HaMoed, excuse me. Tani, we learned, now we're going to shift gears to talk now about Chol HaMoed, but about Yontif. Tani, Tanruvi Kirayim Chadoshim, a new oven, Ain't sochim also b'shemen, was not allowed to coat them with oil, because it's like finishing them up, and that's not permitted on Yom Tov. Vein totally also malis was not allowed to rub them with a rag, which also like a polishing. Vein chosmin also one cannot strengthen them, forge them by putting cold water on them when they are hot. Bishvil she is chasm in order to forge them. However, it should be lishbos olim sakter if you do it in order to boil some water, and the water happens to boil over, mutter, that's okay, even on Yom Tov. The Tana also learns this in Brisa. Tana b'kirayim chadoshim, a new oven, harein k'kol came like all vessels which can be carried in the courtyard. In other words, you're allowed to use them on Yom Tov, but you're just not allowed to strengthen them or do a finishing touches on them. Rabbi Shmuel, horei midochak, he allowed in the doichak, meaning where there was no choice, there was compelling necessity, to bring a new stove, mibeitzo umon, from the craftsman's house, lishbos alesakter, to boil food, bitchila, initially beyond it. Even though it's a very difficult thing to be mati, even a chomoid was not supposed to go to a craftsman's house and pick up finished goods. We're going to have that in the second parak, because it looks bad. And certainly not in Yom Tov, because you might actually fix it in place, cement it in place. Nevertheless, it was a tight spot. They didn't have anything left to cook on Yom Tov, so therefore you allowed them to go ahead and fix it in spot on Yom Tov, no, not fix it in spot, and use a new oven on Yom Tov in order to cook. Okay, we'll stop here for this evening, and I hope that we didn't miss Marav yet.